He said it was just a client emergency. I watched my birthday cake melting under the restaurant lights, then stared at our joint rewards app. A fresh charge at a luxury hotel. Room 14-8. I did not cry or call him like some frantic wife. I simply sent one text, "Say hi to the man in suite 1408. The true shock was not his infidelity. It was the massive financial trap he was building. My name is Holly James. I am 39 years old, born in the quiet, unpretentious foothills of Knoxville. But for the last decade, I have been navigating the sharp, glittering edges of Nashville by trade. I am the Director of Contract Compliance for Hawthorne Meridian Health, a massive medical supply corporation. My entire professional existence revolves around finding the trapdoors hidden in plain sight. I read liability clauses, indemnification terms, and breach of contract penalties the way other people read the morning weather report. I am known in my department for being calm to the point of being unsettling. I am meticulous. I do not miss the fine print, and I do not tolerate structural vulnerabilities. Perhaps that was the bitterest irony of my marriage. I had spent so long looking for loopholes in heavy corporate binders that I failed to see the massive crater opening up right in the center of my own living room. My husband, Owen Mercer, is 42. He works in client development for Wexler North Consulting. If I am the person who builds the fences and tests the locks, Owen is the person who convinces you that you do not need fences at all. He is impeccably suave, armed with a smooth, persuasive baritone and a smile that makes you feel like you are the most fascinating person in any room he enters. He is exceptionally gifted at projecting the image of a man carrying some grand, exhausting responsibility. To the outside world, he is always carrying a heavy load for the sake of his firm, his demanding clients, and our supposedly perfect family. I had booked the table for my birthday 3 weeks in advance. It was a high-end rooftop restaurant overlooking the Nashville skyline, a place where the ambient noise was just a sophisticated hum of jazz and clinking crystal, and the lights of the city blurred into a sea of gold and amber through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I had specifically requested the corner window seat. I pre-ordered a dark chocolate and raspberry tart. I even arranged for a bottle of vintage wine to be breathing at the table when we arrived. The exact label Owen had pointed out during a vacation in Napa, telling me we should only open it on truly memorable occasions. Turning 39 felt like it qualified. I sat there for an hour and a half. The delicate icing on my birthday dessert began to sag and melt under the warm, focused lighting of the restaurant. The ice in my water glass dissolved into nothing. The waiter eventually stopped hovering. Realizing the empty chair across from me was going to stay empty, I just sat there, my posture perfectly straight, watching the condensation drip slowly down the sides of the expensive, untouched wine bottle. Then, my phone vibrated against the heavy white linen tablecloth. It was a text message from Owen. It was brief, surgical, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Major client emergency. Do not wait up for me. So sorry." There was no frantic phone call apologizing for the delay. There was no promise to make it up to me tomorrow. Most glaringly, there was not a single mention of the phrase "Happy Birthday." I kept my phone in my hand and sat perfectly still. I was not about to unravel in the middle of a crowded dining room. I simply absorbed the cold reality of the glowing screen. Just as I was about to lock my phone and ask for the check, a second notification slid down from the top edge of my screen. It was an alert from our joint premium rewards card. It was a fresh charge for room service at the Halcyon House Hotel. The receipt details were terrifyingly clear. It included a late-night dining markup, a hefty gratuity, and was billed directly to Suite 1408. I clicked on the digital receipt, my eyes scanning the metadata. The name attached to the primary reservation was not Owen Mercer. It was Adrian Vale. I knew that name. Everyone in Owen's orbit knew that name. Adrian Vale was a boutique hotel investor well past the age of 50. He was handsome in a predatory, overly polished kind of way, immensely wealthy, and entirely accustomed to the world bending its rules and breaking its boundaries to accommodate his desires. He was Owen's biggest whale, the golden goose client that was supposed to secure Owen's promotion to senior partner by the end of the fiscal year. I quietly paid the tab for the unopened wine. I walked out to the valet, handed over my ticket, and got into my car. I did not drive back to our quiet, perfectly manicured suburban home. I merged onto the interstate and drove directly toward the downtown district where the Halcyon House Hotel stood. My mind was eerily quiet. There was no radio playing, no tears blurring my vision. My chest felt tight, bound by bands of steel, but my hands on the steering wheel were perfectly steady. I pulled into the hotel's cobblestone drop-off area, but purposefully bypassed the brightly lit main valet stand. I knew the architectural layout of the Halcyon from a corporate retreat years ago. I drove around to the narrow side street, parking my car in a shadowed loading zone that offered a clear, unobstructed view of the VIP elevator side exit. I turned off the engine. I waited in the dark, my eyes fixed on the heavy brass doors. It only took a few minutes. The doors pushed open, spilling a sharp rectangle of yellow light onto the damp pavement. Owen walked out first. Adrian Vale followed right behind him, stepping out into the cool night air. They were not reviewing investment portfolios. They were not shaking hands like two serious businessmen concluding a late-night strategy session. Adrian reached out and casually adjusted the collar of Owen's coat. His hand lingered heavily on the back of Owen's neck. Owen leaned into the touch, smiling a soft, exhausted, deeply intimate smile that I had not seen directed at me in over 2 years. It was a devastating visual confirmation, yet my heart did not shatter into pieces. It crystallized into something hard and sharp. I picked up my phone. I did not roll down the window to scream his name into the quiet street. I did not march over to slap my husband across his face and demand an explanation. I simply opened my camera app, zoomed in through the windshield, and took one clear, high-resolution photograph of Adrian's hand resting possessively on my husband's skin under the unforgiving glow of the street lamp. I opened my text message thread with Owen. I attached the photograph. Below it, I typed a single sentence. "Say hi to the man in suite 1408. I hit send. Through the windshield, I watched the detonation happen in real time. Owen's phone illuminated in his hand. He stopped walking mid-stride. He looked down at the screen, even from across the street. In the dim ambient light of the city, I could see the exact moment his carefully constructed world stopped spinning. He froze completely, rigid as a statue. His suave, confident posture collapsed inward. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow, pale, and genuinely terrified. He frantically spun around, his eyes scanning the dark street, desperately searching the line of parked cars for my vehicle. I put the car in drive and pulled smoothly away from the curb, slipping seamlessly into the flow of nighttime traffic before his panicked eyes could locate me in the shadows. As I drove away, leaving him standing there in the wreckage of his lie, a deep, glacial chill began to spread through my veins. It was not the shock of the affair settling into my bones. It was something else. A small, seemingly insignificant detail from the digital receipt was rapidly expanding in my mind, sharply coming into focus. On that notification, right beneath the charge for suite 1408, there had been a long, specific merchant transaction code. At the time, it had just looked like random alphanumeric data generated by the hotel's billing system. But as I navigated the empty streets back toward our neighborhood, the sequence of characters locked into place in my memory with a sickening click. I had seen a code with that exact same sequence just a few days ago. It was printed at the top margin of a thick stack of complex refinancing documents. Documents that Owen had hastily shoved into a leather portfolio and hidden from my line of sight the moment I walked into his home office to ask about dinner. The air in my car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. The betrayal of his body was a painful, ugly truth. Yes, but the realization hitting me now was entirely lethal. My husband was not just having a secret, passionate rendezvous in a luxury hotel room. That transaction code, the hidden financial documents, the sudden influx of these so-called client emergencies, it was all connected. The birthday dinner he purposely abandoned was not an accidental oversight. It was a calculated distraction. It was a deliberate strategy to get me out of the house, waiting naively in a restaurant, while he finalized something catastrophic in Suite 1408. He was not just giving his nights to another man. He was using those quiet, stolen hours to pave over my name, to leverage my hard-earned assets, and to turn my entire life into collateral for a dirty, hidden agenda. The affair was just the smokescreen. The real crime was buried in the paperwork. It took exactly 22 minutes for the sound of his car tires to crunch against the gravel of our driveway. 22 minutes. If he had actually been at the corporate center across the river like he had claimed earlier that week, the drive would have taken at least 45 minutes in this late-evening traffic. The math was simple, and the math did not lie. He had scrambled straight from the valet stand to his car, breaking every speed limit on his way back to the suburbs. I left the house dark, with only the moonlight spilling through the kitchen window. I sat in the absolute center of our large, custom-built kitchen, illuminated only by the pale, cold glow of the moonlight spilling through the window over the sink. On the marble island directly in front of me sat a square, white cardboard box. It was the birthday cake I had ordered, boxed up by the restaurant staff out of sheer pity when they handed me the check. Next to the unopened box was a tall glass of iced tap water. There was no television murmuring in the background. There was no soft jazz playing on the smart speakers. There were absolutely no tears on my face. The heavy oak front door opened and closed with a frantic, echoing thud. Footsteps moved rapidly down the hardwood hallway, stopping abruptly at the threshold of the kitchen. Owen stood there, his chest heaving under his perfectly tailored dress shirt. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked wildly around the dark room before his eyes finally locked onto my silhouette, sitting motionless at the island. He was bracing for a hurricane. I could see it in the rigid tension of his shoulders, the way his hands curled into defensive fists at his sides. He expected me to scream, to hurl the glass of water at his head, to demand the agonizing, graphic details of what he was doing with another man in a luxury suite. He had prepared an entire script for a hysterical, heartbroken wife. I gave him nothing but silence. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. It filled the space between us, pressing heavily against his chest until he could not bear the weight of it anymore. "Holly," he breathed, his voice a ragged, unstable whisper. He took one hesitant step forward, stopping when I did not shift my gaze. "Holly, please, you have to let me explain. It is so incredibly complicated." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. The ice clinked sharply against the glass. The sharp sound made him flinch. "It is not what it looked like," he continued, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a panicked rush. "I mean, it is, but it is not just that. Adrian, he is a deeply demanding client. He requires a certain level of access, of constant attention. The lines between the professional and the personal, they got blurred. He needed me for this massive deal. Holly. He needed me to be there, to be close, to keep the investors aligned and happy. Everything just spiraled entirely out of my control. He was trying to weave a corporate safety net under his infidelity. He was trying to package a marital betrayal into a high-stakes business strategy. "I know how this looks," Owen said, his voice dropping into a lower register of practiced, desperate earnestness. "I know this looks terrible, and I am so sorry." I set the glass down on the marble. That was the phrase. That was the exact sequence of words that told me everything I needed to know about the man standing in my kitchen. He did not say he was sorry for destroying our vows. He did not say he was sorry for leaving me sitting alone in a restaurant on my 39th birthday. He said he was sorry for how it looked. He was terrified of the optical fallout. The broken image was far more threatening to him than the actual broken marriage. I folded my hands together, resting them on the cool stone counter. I do not want an explanation. Owen, I want your keys. He blinked, completely derailed by the flat, emotionless tone of my voice. What? I want the small silver key to the private post office box you opened last year, I stated, my voice steady, carrying clearly across the dark room. I want the brass key to the fireproof document safe in the basement, and I want the spare black access card for the shared garage. I want them on this counter, right now. He stared at me, his jaw working as he tried to process the demand. The script he had memorized had completely failed him. Holly, let us just talk about this rationally. Let us go upstairs, turn on the lights, and sit down. The keys, I repeated, not raising my voice by a single decibel. Owen swallowed hard. He reached into his trouser pocket, his fingers trembling slightly as he pulled out his heavy leather keychain. He fumbled with the metal rings, detaching the small silver key and the heavy brass one. He walked slowly toward the island, his eyes locked on my face, desperately searching for a crack in my composure, a sign of ordinary grief. He found none. He set the keys down on the marble with a soft metallic clatter. Then, he reached into his wallet and pulled out the thick black plastic access card, placing it right beside the keys. There is a set of master files in the locked bottom drawer of your office cabinet, I continued, looking directly into his eyes. I will need that key as well. For a fraction of a second, his entire body seized. It was a microscopic freeze, a nearly imperceptible tightening of the muscles around his eyes and his jawline. But I saw it. I had spent 15 years reading the subtle, involuntary bodily tells of hostile negotiators across boardroom tables. That tiny hesitation was a massive flashing siren. Whatever he was hiding in that bottom drawer was exponentially more dangerous than an affair with a wealthy hotel investor. The affair was just a surface symptom. The terminal disease was in the paperwork. I lost that cabinet key months ago. He lied, his voice regaining a tiny fraction of its usual smooth cadence. There is nothing in there anyway, just old tax returns and expired warranty manuals. I see, I replied calmly. I did not press him. I did not need him to hand me the key right then. The fact that he instinctively lied about it was all the confirmation I required. I slid the 2 keys and the access card across the marble toward my side of the island, safely out of his reach. Starting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, every single joint account, every shared line of credit, and every mutual access portal will be under complete review. You will not initiate any transfers. You will not alter any passwords. Holly, you are overreacting, he pleaded, genuine panic bleeding back into his tone as the strict financial reality of my words hit him. You cannot just lock me out of our entire life. I am not locking you out of our life, I corrected him, my tone clinical. I am containing a severe security breach. Tonight, you will sleep in the guest studio behind the garage. You will pack whatever suits and shirts you need for the remainder of the week. You will not step foot in the primary bedroom. You will not use the main house bathrooms. If you need something from the kitchen, you will wait until I'm not in it. He stared at me as if I had suddenly become a complete stranger. Holly, please. I love you. I really do. This thing with Adrian, it means absolutely nothing to me. It was a catastrophic mistake under extreme pressure. Do not throw away our entire history. Do not destroy everything we have built together over one stupid, reckless night. He was still playing the role of the remorseful, wayward husband begging for grace. He fundamentally misunderstood the battlefield we were currently standing on. I stood up slowly from the high stool. I picked up the small, unopened white cake box and my half-empty glass of water. I looked at him, taking in the expensive designer suit, the handsome, panicked face, and the sheer, staggering arrogance of a man who thought he could outsmart me in my own house. Do not flatter yourself, Owen, I said, my voice dropping to a low, glacial whisper that echoed softly against the tile backsplash. The forgotten birthday is going to be the easiest part of what I'm about to find out. I woke with the same hard clarity I had carried through the night. There was no time to call anyone or fall apart. Grief is a luxury reserved for those who are safe, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was standing in the middle of a minefield. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, I walked through the heavy glass doors of the private wealth management branch downtown. This was the institution that held the accounts I had established long before I ever put on a wedding ring. The assets I had deliberately kept isolated from our joint economy. My advisor. A quiet man who understood the value of silence. Ushered me into his office. I handed him a list of immediate directives. First, I completely revoked the secondary user privileges Owen held on my emergency line of credit. Second, I initiated a wire transfer, moving every single cent of my liquid reserve cash into a newly generated account under my sole Social Security number. Finally, I requested a hard copy printout of the comprehensive transaction history for our joint premium rewards card, covering the previous 14 months. I did not want a digital file that could be tracked or intercepted. I wanted the raw, undeniable paper trail. I took the thick manila folder to an empty corner booth in a coffee shop across the street. I did not order anything to drink. I simply spread the crisp white pages across the wooden table and began to read the data. There were the standard, mundane charges, of course, the grocery deliveries, the dry cleaning, the utility auto pays. But interspersed among the ordinary expenses of a suburban life were glaring, aggressive anomalies. I found repeated, heavy deductions for commercial appraisal fees. There were recurring charges for secure, expedited legal courier services. There were municipal fees for commercial property title searches. Then, there were the frequent overnight stays at various properties within the Halcyon hotel chain. Most disturbing of all were the substantial, structured outgoing wire transfers directed to a corporate entity I had never heard of in my life. The name on the beneficiary line read Meridian Bridge Holdings. By 10:30 in the morning, I was dialing a secure line to Elise Benton. Elise is my personal family attorney, a woman possessing a mind like a steel trap and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Next, I contacted Noah Pike, an independent forensic accountant I had utilized previously for complex corporate audits at my firm. Both of them were seasoned professionals, discreet enough to operate in the shadows, and tough enough not to accidentally alert my husband to the fact that he was now under a microscope. By early afternoon, Noah had quietly mirrored my home network logs. We spoke on a fully encrypted line. "Someone has been extremely busy inside your network," Noah told me, his voice devoid of any comforting inflection. He explained that my personal tax files, my localized digital archives, and my comprehensive insurance schedules had been systematically accessed and copied. The Internet Protocol address logged for these unauthorized entries did not belong to a random hacker. It belonged to the router sitting in my own living room. I asked Noah to isolate the exact timestamps of those breaches. I cross-referenced the dates he provided with my travel calendar. The digital trespassing had occurred on 3 distinct nights over the past 6 months. On every single one of those nights, I had been out of state, flying to Chicago or Dallas for corporate compliance tours. While I was sleeping in airport hotels, my husband had been sitting on our sofa, drinking our coffee, and quietly harvesting my identity. Elise took a different, strictly legal angle. She pulled the complete dossier on my separate marital assets. The crown jewel of my premarital portfolio was a historic commercial warehouse I had purchased and converted into highly profitable luxury rental lofts. It was held securely under a single-member corporate structure named James Rowe Storage LLC. "Listen to me very closely, Holly," Elise instructed over the phone, the rustle of heavy bond paper echoing in the background. "This specific property structure is ironclad. I built it that way on purpose. From a purely legal standpoint, this asset absolutely cannot be leveraged, collateralized, transferred, or mortgaged without your direct, physical wet ink signature. We also require a properly executed set of management minutes. signed and notarized by you in person." Her words were a fortress, but they also highlighted the exact nature of the threat. If the asset required my physical signature, and Owen was gathering appraisal fees and title searches, he was preparing to forge something massive. I spent the next 2 hours in my office executing a comprehensive digital blackout. I changed every single password I possessed, moving from bank portals to social media to municipal tax accounts. I rerouted all two-factor authentication prompts from our shared cellular plan to a newly purchased, prepaid device that was currently sitting securely in the bottom of my purse. I locked down my email servers, encrypted my cloud storage backups, and revoked all shared access to my financial folders. I moved silently, systematically sealing every digital backdoor and securing the perimeter before Owen even realized he needed to start deleting his tracks. While the security protocols compiled on my desktop, I returned to the credit card statements spread across my desk. I mapped out the luxury dining charges and the high-end suite reservations, highlighting them with a bright yellow marker. I overlaid those dates with my shared marital calendar. The extravagant dinners, the expensive room service, the late-night hotel bars, they perfectly aligned with the exact weeks Owen had complained about being buried under punishing client campaigns. He had used his job as a shield. The betrayal was not a spontaneous lapse in judgment or a sudden, confusing midlife crisis. It was a sustained, heavily funded parallel life, subsidized by our joint resources and hidden behind the respectable facade of corporate dedication. As the sun began to set, casting long, sharp shadows across my office floor, the fragmented pieces of data finally locked together to form a horrifying, cohesive picture. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the whiteboard where I had mapped the connections. The profound realization settled over me, heavier and far more dangerous than the simple pain of a cheating spouse. The affair with the hotel investor was merely an operational expense. Owen did not just have a secret life. He was actively architecting a massive, highly structured financial maneuver. And to execute whatever fraudulent, high-stakes scheme he was building, he desperately needed the three things I guarded most fiercely. He needed my legal signature. He needed my pristine financial records. And he needed the bulletproof professional credibility of my name. The man I married was not just breaking my heart. He was preparing to steal my entire existence. By noon, Noah and Elise had synthesized the raw data into a clear, terrifying architecture. We convened on another encrypted conference call, the digital connection crisp and sterile. Noah spoke first, his tone entirely clinical, delivering the facts like a coroner reading a forensic report. Meridian Bridge Holdings was not a dead end. It was a sophisticated shell company, an intermediary corporate entity specifically engineered to mask the aggressive acquisition of a sprawling, historic boutique property located down in Savannah. The target asset was named Ashbourne House. Elise took over the briefing. Through her specialized network, she had managed to quietly pull a copy of the preliminary financing portfolio currently circulating among a tight circle of private mezzanine lenders. When she read the core list of collateral out loud to me, the ambient temperature in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. Right there, sitting boldly on page 47 under a heading explicitly labeled as Projected Guarantor Assets, was James Rowe Storage LLC, my warehouse. They had listed my warehouse. "They are floating your property in the draft," Elise said, her voice tight with professional outrage. "They are actively using its appraised market value to artificially inflate their borrowing base and secure a massive bridge loan." I had never signed a single letter of intent. I had never been in a room with these aggressive lenders. I had never even heard the name Ashbourne House until this exact moment. Yet my most valuable, protected premarital asset was currently being dangled as a financial safety net for a high-risk, highly leveraged hotel acquisition orchestrated by my husband and his lover. But the sheer audacity of the operation did not stop at attempted property theft. Noah had dug even deeper into the investor presentation, dissecting the 50-page glossy pitch deck they were using to court private equity. He forwarded the heavy file to my secure inbox, I clicked it open and scrolled rapidly down to the executive team biographies. There, staring back at me from the high-resolution screen, was my own professional headshot. Owen and Adrian had not just plotted to steal my commercial real estate, they had outright plagiarized my career. They had brazenly inserted my extensive resume into the legal document, officially listing me as the Strategic Compliance Control Advisor for the Savannah Project. They explicitly highlighted my decade of tenure as a corporate director, aggressively leveraging my pristine, hard-earned reputation for regulatory risk management to make their highly speculative, dangerously structured venture look bulletproof to outside investors. The devastating reality crystallized in my mind. My husband had turned our entire marriage into a fraudulent shell company. He was using the unblemished social and professional standing of his wife to borrow unearned trust from skeptical investors, and he was simultaneously planning to use the hard, tangible assets of his wife to quietly plug his massive cash flow holes. I did not scream. I did not throw my heavy ceramic coffee mug against the wall. Righteous anger is a thoroughly useless emotion when you are standing in an active war zone. I simply decided to move first. "Lock the title down," I instructed Elise, my voice eerily calm. "Do it right now. Do not wait for the afternoon filing window." Within 1 hour, Elise had successfully filed a formal, highly restrictive transaction alert on the county title system. It was the legal equivalent of a tripwire. From that exact second onward, absolutely no changes, no liens, no ownership transfers, and no encumbrances could be recorded against my property without my direct physical presence, a live identity verification process, and my original wet ink signature on the primary documents. Simultaneously, I contacted my commercial property management firm. I ordered an immediate, hard reroute of all incoming rental revenue generated by the warehouse lofts. I completely bypassed our standard, visible operational accounts and swept the incoming cash flow directly into a temporary, heavily isolated preservation account. If Owen had harbored any secret intentions of siphoning off my reliable monthly liquidity to quietly cover his mounting legal fees or his expensive commercial appraisal costs, he was going to find the well completely dry. Then, I began the meticulous, exhausting work of internal preparation. I spent the remainder of the afternoon building an exhaustive, categorized inventory of my entire life. I logged every single piece of high-value imported furniture in our home. I tracked the exact buyout clauses on our 2 luxury vehicle leases. I pulled our comprehensive insurance schedules, documented the appraised value of the fine art we had purchased in Santa Fe, and calculated the precise balance of our accumulated travel reward accounts. I downloaded 5 years of detailed spending history, establishing an irrefutable, mathematically sound baseline of our marital standard of living. I was not preparing to defend myself in a messy, emotional divorce. I was actively arming myself to launch an overwhelming offensive strike. The true, undeniable confirmation of Owen's escalating desperation arrived exactly at 4:30 in the afternoon. I was working quietly from the kitchen island when a heavy, urgent knock rattled the front door. I walked quietly down the hall and looked through the glass peephole. A courier dressed in a dark blue uniform stood on the porch, holding a thick, securely sealed legal envelope and an electronic signature pad. I did not open the door immediately. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the camera application, and hit the record button. I held the lens steady, framing the shot as I turned the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. "Delivery for Holly Mercer," the courier announced, looking down at his digital clipboard. "I just need a quick signature from you on these routine restructuring documents." Routine restructuring documents. The phrasing was so deliberate, so specifically and carefully chosen by someone who desperately hoped I would simply sign the pages without reading the fine print. Owen was actively trying to ram the fraudulent paperwork through the system while he thought I was still disoriented, still weeping, still entirely paralyzed by the emotional shock of his infidelity. He was arrogant enough to assume that the devastation of a broken heart would completely blind me to a financial ambush. "Who is the listed sender?" I asked, keeping the camera lens clearly pointed at the thick envelope resting in his hand. "It just says Wexler North Internal Processing," the courier replied, shifting his weight uncomfortably as he finally noticed the bright red recording light illuminated on my phone. "I am officially refusing this delivery," I stated clearly, ensuring my voice was captured flawlessly on the audio track. "I am not accepting, reviewing, or signing any documents originating from that sender. Please mark this package as rejected by the recipient and return it immediately to the origin address." The courier frowned, tapping the screen of his handheld device with a stylus. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" The sender marked it as highly urgent. "I am absolutely sure. Have a good afternoon." I shut the door firmly and locked the deadbolt. I leaned my back against the heavy wood, listening to his heavy boots retreat down the porch stairs and the sound of his delivery truck pulling away from the curb. I stopped the recording and saved the video file, uploading it instantly to my secure cloud server. The reality of my situation was no longer a working theory or a paranoid suspicion. It was a tangible, physical threat that had just tried to cross my threshold. Standing there in the quiet, shadowed hallway of my home, the final, chilling realization locked into place, sealing my resolve. The night of my birthday, the melting chocolate cake, the cold text message about the fabricated client emergency. None of it was the actual beginning of this nightmare. That night was merely the terrifying moment I accidentally stumbled in the dark and brushed my bare hand against the jagged, exposed tip of a massive, deeply buried conspiracy. Owen had been carefully constructing this intricate trap for many months. He had cultivated the illicit relationships, forged the necessary documents, and systematically laid the financial groundwork while sitting across from me and smiling at the dinner table. The affair with Adrian Vale was nothing but a calculated distraction. A bright, ugly flare intentionally fired into the sky to pull my attention completely away from the real target. He did not just want to leave our marriage. He wanted to entirely consume my assets to build his new life. And he was currently panicking, pushing couriers to my door, because he finally realized that his wife was wide awake. The newly purchased prepaid device resting on my kitchen counter vibrated, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the house after the courier departed. The screen illuminated with a local area code. But it was not one from my immediate city. It was a Louisville prefix. Only 2 people in the world possessed this specific, heavily encrypted phone number. I picked up the device and pressed the green icon. "Holly," a voice stated abruptly. The tone was deep, slightly raspy, and completely devoid of any introductory pleasantries. I recognized the cadence immediately, even though I had not heard it in over 2 years. It belonged to Dana Mercer, the older sister of the man I was currently preparing to dismantle. Dana worked as a senior title examiner up in Kentucky. She was a hardened, pragmatic woman who viewed the world entirely through the lens of public records and property disputes. She and my husband maintained a relationship that could best be described as mutually agreeable estrangement. They exchanged brief text messages on major holidays, and nothing more. "Dana," I replied, my voice steady, giving absolutely nothing away. "This is an unexpected time for a call. I am skipping the small talk because we do not have time for it," Dana said, the line crackling with the static of a speakerphone. "I am currently looking at a multi-state pre-closing packet. It crossed my regional desk about an hour ago because one of the secondary underwriters in my division flagged a highly unusual cross-collateralization issue. I saw the primary parcel identification number listed on the addendum. I know exactly what that specific sequence of numbers represents. It is your commercial loft building." My grip on the edge of the marble island tightened, but my breathing remained perfectly controlled. "I flagged the file and pulled it off the active workflow," Dana continued, her voice tight with a mixture of professional disgust and deep familial shame. "I knew the absolute second I saw your property listed as collateral that my brother was running a scam. He is back to his old tricks, but this time he is playing in a much deeper, far more dangerous pool." "Back to his old tricks," I echoed quietly, letting the phrase hang in the air. Dana let out a harsh, bitter sigh. Over the next 20 minutes, she completely shattered the polished, impeccable illusion my husband had spent the last decade selling to me and the rest of the corporate world. She explained that the suave, successful executive I married was nothing more than a carefully constructed, highly articulate fiction. Long before he ever moved to Nashville and bought bespoke suits, Owen had a distinct, destructive pattern of floating his entire lifestyle on dangerous, short-term liabilities. He built his early professional years on massive, unrealistic promises. He would create disastrous financial craters, max out lines of credit under the guise of visionary startup investments, and then quietly step back into the shadows while someone else absorbed the brutal impact. He had bankrupted a small logistics company run by their cousin, charming his way out of the legal fallout while his family quietly paid off the wreckage to avoid public embarrassment. He was a serial grifter of the upper middle class, armed with a perfect smile and a terrifying lack of consequence. I started getting a very bad feeling roughly 6 months ago, Dana confessed. The raw honesty in her voice was jarring. He called me out of nowhere, asking bizarre, highly specific hypothetical questions about out-of-state commercial liens and the exact verification protocols for spousal consent forms. I suspected right then that he was crossing a serious legal line, but I stayed quiet. I told myself it was his life, your marriage, and not my problem. I chose the path of least resistance. She paused, taking a ragged breath. I was incredibly wrong. I should have called you the minute I hung up the phone with him. My cowardice and my silence just gave him a much longer runway to drag you down with him. I did not offer her absolution. I did not tell her that everything was fine or that I understood her hesitation. Her silence had cost me crucial time, and I had no intention of pretending otherwise. What else do you have? Dana, I asked, cutting straight through the emotional vulnerability to the tactical reality. Check your secure inbox, she instructed. I just sent you an encrypted zip file. I carried the phone into my office, woke my desktop monitor, and opened the message. It contained the raw, unedited metadata of the principal loan document that had been submitted to the underwriters. Look at the digital forensic trail on the signature pages, Dana directed. I opened the file properties. The timestamp data was undeniable. The file had been actively modified, unsealed, and resaved on his personal laptop late into the night, exactly 24 hours prior to the evening he abandoned me at the restaurant. Dana walked me through the digital artifacts, pointing out where multiple layers of electronic signatures had been clumsily superimposed over a legitimate, outdated scan of my driver license. It was a digital forgery, executed with the frantic sloppiness of a man running out of time. You also need to fully understand who is holding his leash in this deal, Dana warned, shifting the topic to the man who had funded the hotel room. I ran a background check on Adrian Vale through our internal industry network. His public relations team paints him as a boutique visionary, but among independent retail investors, he is notorious. He is a financial scavenger. Dana detailed Adrian's operational blueprint. He specialized in finding desperate, ambitious junior partners who were hungry for a massive payout. He would use their money, their emotional dependence, and their deepest personal vulnerabilities to artificially extend the life of dying commercial ventures. He made them cross ethical and legal lines, ensuring they were entirely complicit, so that when the deal inevitably imploded, they would take the fall while he walked away clean. Then, Dana dropped the heaviest, most critical piece of intelligence of the entire conversation. That luxury suite, Dana said, her tone dropping into a grim whisper. The one they booked. I saw the expense reports tied to the syndication file. It was not merely a romantic rendezvous. The room service and the intimate touches were entirely secondary. That specific night was scheduled as the definitive document review session. They were sitting in that room, doing a final, comprehensive sweep of the fraudulent paperwork before aggressively pushing the entire portfolio down to the underwriters to finalize the acquisition. The revelation locked everything into place. My husband had used his lover's hotel room as a war room to finalize the theft of my property. He has always been a parasite, Holly, Dana said, delivering the final blow with chilling clarity. You are not the first person he has lied to. You are just the first one who has enough paperwork to bury him. Thank you for the files. Dana, I said, my voice completely devoid of any tremor. I will take it from here. I ended the call and set the phone down on the desk. I did not cry for the lost years. I did not scream in rage at the revelation of his past. I simply stared at the glowing metadata on my monitor. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was no longer operating on suspicion, circumstantial evidence, or defensive maneuvers. I possessed the raw, undeniable architecture of their crime. I finally held a weapon heavy enough to break them both. By Thursday evening, the absolute containment strategy I had implemented began to suffocate him. The financial tourniquet was tight and unforgiving. His corporate credit cards were suspended due to the internal ethics flag I had quietly initiated. His personal platinum cards were declining at the gas station because I had severed his authorized user status. The reality of a life without my subsidized stability was crashing down on him. He knocked on the sliding glass door of the sunroom just after 8 o'clock. I unlocked it and let him step inside. For the first time since I met him a decade ago, the immaculate, effortless veneer of Owen Mercer was completely gone. His posture slumped. The skin around his eyes was bruised with exhaustion, and his usually perfectly styled hair was flat and unwashed. He looked exactly like a man who had spent the last 3 nights sleeping on a rigid convertible sofa in a drafty backyard studio, paralyzed by the knowledge that his entire world was collapsing. I need to talk to you, he said. His voice lacked the smooth, resonant baritone he used to close deals. It sounded thin and desperate. I sat down in the high-backed reading chair, crossing my legs. I did not offer him a seat. Speak. He paced the length of the rug, rubbing his face with both hands. It is Adrian, he blurted out, as if confessing the name would magically purge his guilt. It has been going on for about 8 months. It started as a mentorship, a professional connection. Then the boundaries blurred. I hit a wall this year. Holly, a massive, terrifying personal crisis. I felt entirely disconnected from myself, from this house, from my career. I was suffocating in loneliness, and he offered a way out. I completely lost my way. He stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the slap. He was waiting for me to attack his sexuality, to scream about the betrayal of our physical vows, to weep over the fact that he was in love with another man. He wanted a messy, emotional domestic dispute because he knew how to navigate those. He knew how to play the tragic, confused husband. I looked at him with a level of detachment that made him physically recoil. I do not care who you are sleeping with. Owen, I said, my voice perfectly flat and quiet in the dimly lit room. I truly do not. Your emotional crises and your romantic preferences are entirely your own business. The problem is not who you love. The problem is that you used our marriage as a bulletproof vest. You used my name as a shield to hide your incompetence, and you tried to use my real estate as a life raft because you are drowning in your own fraudulent choices. The color drained from his face. The realization that I was not a heartbroken wife, but a hostile auditor, finally anchored itself in his mind. I can fix this, he pleaded, stepping closer, his hands raised in surrender. I swear to you, Holly, I can fix everything. Just please, do not blow this up before the closing date next week. If you lift the title restriction, if you just let the Savannah acquisition go through, the bridge loan clears. The capital gets injected. Adrian and I get our management fee, and I will be entirely solvent. I stared at him, genuinely marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his proposal. If you let it close, he continued, his words rushing together in a panicked stream, I will sign whatever separation agreement you want. I will walk away clean. I will not ask for a single dollar of alimony. I will leave the house, the cars, the retirement accounts. You get everything. Just give me this 1 week. Let the deal fund. He was asking the victim of his theft to quietly hold the bag open so he could finish robbing the vault. I leaned forward slightly, resting my chin on my folded hands. I have exactly one question for you, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer it. He nodded frantically, desperate for any sign of negotiation. If I had not driven to that hotel, I asked, my tone razor sharp. If I had simply gone home and cried myself to sleep over a forgotten birthday dinner. When exactly were you going to tell me that you had pawned my property? The question hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Owen opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the floor, then at the window, searching desperately for a polished excuse, a clever pivot, a corporate half-truth. He found absolutely nothing. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. The quiet in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the central air conditioning. That silence was the most profound, devastating confession of our entire marriage. He was never going to tell me. He never had an exit strategy that involved my consent. He had fully intended to forge the documents, close the commercial loan, and leave me legally chained to a multi-million-dollar liability in another state, completely oblivious until the day the investors inevitably came to collect. He did not want to stop the fraud. He only wanted to finish it before he got caught. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a crisp, folded legal envelope. I held it out to him. These are the temporary conditions drafted by Elise, I stated. You have exactly 2 hours to pack whatever you need for the next 6 months. You will vacate the guest studio tonight. You are moving into a short-term corporate rental downtown. You will not communicate with me directly under any circumstances. Every text message, every email, every phone call goes exclusively through Elise. You will not touch my laptop, my network router, my physical mail, or my filing cabinets. If you violate a single parameter of this agreement, I will forward the entire unredacted forensic file to the federal authorities before sunrise. He took the envelope with trembling fingers. The fight completely left his body. He was nothing but a hollow suit. He turned around and walked out the glass door, vanishing into the dark yard without saying another word. Later that night, long after I heard the engine of his car fade down the street, I sat alone at my dining room table. The house was mine again. I opened the heavy, printed copy of the investment deck that Elise had procured. I had read the executive summary, but now I needed to dissect the anatomy of the trap. I bypassed the glossy photographs of the Savannah property and the aggressive, overly optimistic revenue projections. I flipped past the management biographies and the detailed cash flow analysis. I went straight to the back of the binder, into the dense, unreadable thicket of the legal appendix. There, buried on page 142, tucked quietly between a tedious environmental impact survey and an outdated municipal zoning schedule. I found it. It was a single, densely typed page detailing the irrevocable guarantor commitments. At the very bottom, printed in stark black ink, was my name. Hovering directly above the printed letters was a flawlessly executed digital replication of my personal signature. It was a classic document burial. You only place a critical authorization on page 142 if you are praying to God that the underwriter gets exhausted by page 50 and just checks the box. I closed the heavy binder. I walked into the kitchen. Sitting on the counter next to the sink was the small, silver numeral 9 candle that had been resting on top of the cake box I brought home from the restaurant. It was slightly warped, its wick completely unburned. I picked it up. I did not hold it to my chest. I did not mourn the celebrations we would never have or the future he had systematically burned to the ground. I simply dropped the wax digit into the stainless steel trash bin. As it hit the bottom with a dull thud, a profound, icy clarity washed over me. The mourning period was officially over. From this exact second forward, this was no longer a matter of a broken heart or a betrayed marriage. This was a hostile corporate takeover. It was about asset recovery, total systemic dismantling, and ensuring that the men who built this fraudulent machine were crushed beneath its gears. At exactly 8 o'clock on Monday morning, I walked into my office at Hawthorne Meridian Health and locked the door behind me. I did not pour a cup of coffee. I did not check my standard departmental voicemails. I opened a blank, highly secured internal communication channel and drafted a direct memorandum to our Executive Vice President of Corporate Counsel. I attached the specific pages of the Ashbourne House Investment Prospectus that Elise had intercepted. I highlighted the section where my name, my corporate title, and my extensive professional biography were boldly printed. I wrote a crisp, emotionless paragraph explicitly stating that my identity and my professional credentials were being utilized in an external, highly leveraged private equity syndication without my knowledge, without my consent, and in direct violation of our corporate compliance policies. The response was instantaneous and entirely devastating to their operation. My corporate legal team did exactly what they are paid millions of dollars a year to do. They protected the firm. Within 4 hours, Hawthorne Meridian issued a formal, aggressive cease and desist order directly to the syndication managers and the primary lenders listed in the Ashbourne portfolio. They categorically denied any association with the project, officially repudiating my involvement and demanding the immediate retraction of all materials bearing my name. In a single morning, I completely severed the borrowed credibility that Owen and Adrian were desperately relying on to pacify their nervous investors. While my corporate attorneys were dropping a bomb on the syndication, Elise was actively deploying a second wave of legal artillery in the civil courts. She filed an emergency petition for a temporary restraining order, heavily reinforcing the transaction alert we had placed on the warehouse. This injunction legally paralyzed the property, making it absolutely impossible for anyone to execute a mortgage, a lien, or a transfer of deed. More importantly, Elise simultaneously filed a comprehensive data preservation demand. It was a massive, sweeping legal mandate that legally barred Owen from deleting, altering, or destroying any digital data, email correspondence, or financial ledgers on his personal laptop and his cellular phone. If he pressed the delete key even once after receiving that notice, he would be committing felony spoliation of evidence. We effectively trapped him inside his own digital crime scene. The financial architecture of his betrayal became even clearer just before noon. Noah Pike called me on the encrypted line with a new, deeply satisfying revelation. He had successfully mapped the secondary flow of capital. He is not just a lovesick fool who got manipulated by a wealthy client, Noah stated, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. I followed the wire transfers backward from the closing costs. Adrian Vale has been quietly funneling cash into a blind shell company registered in Delaware. The registered agent for that specific limited liability company is your husband. The inbound transfers are all labeled as consulting retainers. It was the definitive proof of premeditated financial conspiracy. Owen was not merely a pawn in Adrian's game, he was a paid accomplice. Armed with this undeniable forensic proof, I prepared my next strike. I compiled a redacted, highly concentrated evidentiary packet. It did not contain any emotional accusations about a ruined marriage. It contained the corporate registration of the shell company, the matching transaction dates of the consulting retainers, and the receipts for the luxury hotel suites that Owen had expensed as client development meetings. I did not send this packet to his immediate supervisor. I bypassed middle management entirely and submitted it directly to the Global Ethics and Compliance Board of Wexler North Consulting. The corporate machine moved with ruthless efficiency. 2 days later, my husband was formally suspended from his firm pending a comprehensive internal investigation. He was locked out of his corporate email, stripped of his building access, and isolated from his entire client portfolio. The charges against him were purely administrative but utterly fatal to his career. He was facing termination for egregious conflicts of interest, the falsification of client gift disclosures, and the unauthorized leveraging of marital assets in an opaque, unapproved commercial venture. I had completely dismantled his professional life without ever raising my voice. The sheer impact of these coordinated strikes finally forced the puppet master out of the shadows. My phone rang late on Thursday afternoon. The caller identification displayed a private, unlisted number. I answered it, knowing exactly who would be on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Mercer?" a voice said smoothly. It was rich, cultured, and entirely devoid of panic. "I believe we have gotten off on the wrong foot." It was Adrian Vale. He sounded exactly like a man who believed he could simply purchase his way out of a burning building. "We do not have a foot to get off on, Mr. Vale," I replied, my tone as cold and hard as polished steel. "State your business," he chuckled, a soft, patronizing sound. "I admire your ferocity. I truly do. But this aggressive legal posturing is completely unnecessary. And frankly, it is bad for everyone's bottom line. The Ashbourne acquisition is a phenomenal opportunity." Owen got a little overzealous with the paperwork. Certainly, but his heart was in the right place. He just wanted to build something substantial for your future. "Do not insult my intelligence by pretending this was an act of marital devotion," I interrupted. "You are running out of time. Your investors are getting spooked by the cease and desist, and your primary guarantor asset is legally frozen. What do you want?" Adrian dropped the polite facade. His voice turned sharp and transactional. "I want you to withdraw the injunction on the warehouse. I want you to retract the complaint to your corporate counsel. In exchange, I am prepared to offer a highly lucrative private settlement, a substantial cash payout, a quiet, uncontested divorce, and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. You walk away wealthy, your husband gets his freedom, and my syndication closes on schedule. Everyone wins." He was trying to buy my silence with the very money he was planning to make off my stolen assets. "You have made a fundamental miscalculation." "Adrian," I said, leaning back in my office chair, "you built this entire strategy on a flawed assumption. You think I am the betrayed wife, desperately looking for a golden parachute to soothe a broken heart." I paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second before delivering the final blow. "I am actually the person who read the fraud structure right from page 3. You are not buying my silence. You are going to spend the next 5 years defending yourself against federal wire fraud charges. Do not ever call this number again." I disconnected the call and blocked the number. I felt a brief surge of victory, a clean, sharp satisfaction. But it was immediately extinguished by an incoming notification from Noah. "Holly, we have a massive problem," Noah said the moment I answered. "I just decrypted the final annex of the loan portfolio. They did not just forge your signature on the property deed." "What else did they do?" I demanded, the familiar icy dread returning to my veins. "Owen accessed our archived digital files," Noah explained, his voice grim. "He pulled a high-resolution scan of your passport, the one you renewed 4 years ago. He submitted it alongside the forged signatures. The implications crashed over me like a physical weight. He used my federal identification," I said slowly, the horror crystallizing. "Yes," Noah confirmed. "He did not just pledge the warehouse. He listed you as a secondary personal co-guarantor on a $10 million high-yield bridge loan. If this deal closes, and they inevitably default, the private equity firm is not just going to seize your commercial property. They are coming after your primary residence, your retirement accounts, and your future wages." I closed my eyes. The battlefield had just expanded exponentially. This was no longer simply a war over a piece of commercial real estate or the bitter end of a failed marriage. My husband had tied a massive, ticking financial bomb directly to my identity. If I did not completely obliterate this entire syndication at its absolute root, my name, my credit, and my professional future would be dragged through a catastrophic civil liability nightmare for the rest of my natural life. The meticulous defensive walls I had built were not going to be enough. I had to burn their entire operation to the ground. Marisol Dean contacted me exactly 48 hours after I severed communications with Adrian Vale. The fracture in their syndicate did not come from a sudden legal subpoena or an external banking audit. It came from the inside, collapsing under the unbearable weight of its own internal paranoia. An encrypted email bypassed my corporate spam filters just after lunch. The sender was an anonymous address, but the subject line contained my precise employee identification number and the exact internal routing code for my compliance department. I opened the message. There was no text in the body, only a secure link with a 10-minute expiration timer. I clicked the link. A video call initiated, the screen resolving into the image of a woman sitting in the shadowed interior of a parked car. She looked completely exhausted. Her dark hair pulled back severely, her eyes darting nervously as if constantly checking her rear-view mirror. "My name is Marisol Dean," she said, her voice tight and trembling slightly. "I am the Chief Financial Officer for Adrian Vale's primary investment group, and if you do not help me, I am going to go to federal prison for a financial crime your husband orchestrated." I leaned closer to the monitor. "Why are you calling me?" "Marisol. Because the Ashbourne deal is falling apart, and Adrian is actively setting me up to take the fall," she confessed, the panic bleeding through her professional composure. "I have been forced to cook the operational ledgers for this Savannah acquisition for the past 7 months. The numbers do not make any sense. The projected revenue is a complete fiction." When your title injunction hit the warehouse property, Adrian went absolutely ballistic. He told me to prep a burn file, a paper trail that makes it look like the fraudulent valuations and the forged collateral were entirely my administrative error. She held up a thick manila folder to the camera lens. "I am not going down for them," Marisol stated, her jaw setting with a sudden, desperate resolve. "I have the actual unredacted side letters. I am sending them to your secure server right now. You need to look at page 4. A notification chimed on my second monitor. I downloaded the attached file and scrolled rapidly to the 4th page. What I read fundamentally altered the entire landscape of my betrayal. The document was a contingency agreement, drafted and signed by Owen. It explicitly detailed the backup plan in the event that the commercial warehouse asset was delayed in underwriting, if my real estate did not clear the title process in time. Owen had formally committed to an alternative form of collateral. He had guaranteed Adrian full, unrestricted access to the proprietary medical procurement pipelines I controlled at Hawthorne Meridian Health. He had formally proposed placing me on the board of the newly acquired hotel as a special advisor, a fabricated role designed entirely to leverage my corporate vendor relationships to secure highly discounted, bulk medical-grade supplies for Adrian's entire hospitality portfolio. My husband was not merely trying to steal my property. He had put my entire career, the flawless professional reputation I had spent 15 years building, on the auction block. He was perfectly willing to compromise my corporate ethics and potentially expose me to federal kickback charges just to keep his fraudulent syndication afloat. "There is more," Marisol said, pulling my attention back to the video feed. "The final closing is scheduled for this coming Friday. They are not doing it in a sterile boardroom here in Nashville. Adrian moved the venue to Savannah. He is masking the signing as a luxury client appreciation weekend, and they booked the suites at the Halcyon Reserve." The Halcyon, the exact same luxury hotel chain where he had spent the night of my 39th birthday. It was a staggering, humiliating repetition of his betrayal, a deliberate echo of the night this nightmare began. "You need to be incredibly careful, Holly," Marisol warned, her tone dropping to a frantic whisper. "Adrian is deeply paranoid. He has a long-standing habit of illegally recording sensitive phone calls and private meetings to use as leverage later. He calls it his personal insurance policy. If he feels cornered, he will use those tapes. And your husband is currently a desperate man backed against a wall." There is absolutely no telling what Owen will agree to do to keep this secret from going public. I thanked Marisol, assuring her that Elise would arrange for limited legal immunity in exchange for her full cooperation. I ended the call and immediately dialed my attorney. Elise and I spent the next 4 hours finalizing our tactical approach. We possessed enough raw evidence to blow the deal out of the water right then and there. We could send the side letters to the lenders and watch the entire structure implode from the comfort of my office. But that was too clean. It allowed them to manage the narrative from a distance. It allowed them to spin the failure as a minor administrative hurdle or a sudden change in market conditions. "We are not going to send a single email," I told Elise, my voice resolute. "We are going to let them fly to Savannah. We are going to let them walk into that closing room, sit down at the mahogany table, and smile at the bankers. We are going to let every single person with institutional power gather in one place. And then, we are going to walk in and lock the door with the truth." Elise agreed instantly. She began coordinating our travel logistics. Next, I called Dana in Louisville. I laid out the strategy and asked her the critical question. "I need a technical witness in the room," I said. "I need someone who can look the primary lenders in the eye and definitively testify to the exact methods used to tamper with the title chain and the digital signatures. Will you fly to Savannah?" There was a heavy pause on the line. Then, Dana answered with absolute certainty. "I will be on the first flight out on Thursday morning. Tell me where to meet you." With the pieces perfectly aligned on the board, I walked upstairs to my bedroom. I opened the cedar chest sitting at the foot of my bed. Buried beneath a stack of heavy winter sweaters was a protective garment bag. I unzipped it carefully. Inside hung the midnight blue silk jumpsuit I had specifically purchased for my birthday dinner. I had never worn it. I had left it hanging in the closet when I opted for a more conservative dress, thinking the jumpsuit was perhaps too bold, too aggressive for a quiet, romantic evening. I pulled it from the bag. I carried it to the laundry room, plugged in the steamer, and meticulously pressed every single crease until the fabric fell in flawless. Elegant lines. I carried it back to my bedroom and folded it carefully into my leather travel valise. I was not going to wear it to mourn the passing of my 30s or the death of my marriage. I was going to wear it to the Halcyon Reserve in Savannah. I was going to walk into that boardroom not as a discarded, heartbroken wife seeking closure, but as the absolute architect of their destruction. I was stepping into that room to repossess the life they had attempted to steal. Late that night, as I was packing the final folders of forensic evidence into my briefcase, the burner phone on my nightstand vibrated. It was a voicemail notification. I pressed play, putting the device on speaker. "Holly." Owen's voice filled the quiet bedroom. It was thin, ragged, and entirely stripped of its usual arrogant polish. He sounded exactly like a man standing on the edge of a sheer cliff in the dark. "I know you are angry," the recording continued, his breathing uneven. "I know I have lost you, but I am begging you, from the bottom of my heart, please do not make this public. Please do not contact the investors. Take the house, take the accounts, take whatever you want. Just let me close this deal. Please." The message clicked off, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I stared at the black screen of the phone. In all the years we'd been married, in all the arguments and the quiet resentments, I had never truly understood him until this exact moment. His voice had not cracked when he admitted to the affair. He had not wept when I kicked him out of our home. He had not begged for my forgiveness or asked for a chance to rebuild our trust. He was only begging now because I was threatening the transaction. The voicemail was the final, undeniable proof. He was not terrified of losing the woman he loved. He was utterly terrified of losing the elaborate, fraudulent structure that had fed his ego and funded his vanity for so long. He did not care about the marriage. He only cared about the closing. I dropped the phone into my purse, zipped my travel valise shut, and set my alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning. The game was over. It was time to collect the debt. The flight down to Savannah was a masterclass in silent endurance. Elise, Noah, and I occupied a row in the first-class cabin, communicating only through sharp nods and the passing of sealed manila folders. We did not discuss the betrayal. We only discussed the trap. By the time our hired car pulled up to the grand, sweeping entrance of the Halcyon Reserve at 10 in the morning, the heavy, humid air of the southern coast felt like a physical weight. I stepped out of the vehicle wearing the midnight blue silk jumpsuit. It fit like a layer of armor. The hotel was a masterpiece of manufactured hospitality, smelling of expensive citrus oil and fresh lilies. We bypassed the sprawling lobby and took the private elevator directly to the executive mezzanine. The temperature in the corridor dropped significantly. By the time we entered the designated boardroom, the air conditioning was so fierce it felt like walking into a mortuary. It was fitting. The mahogany table was massive, polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the cold light of the recessed ceiling fixtures. Pitchers of ice water sweat onto linen coasters. The room was already heavily populated. Adrian Vale sat at the absolute head of the table, projecting the relaxed, untouchable aura of a man who owned the building. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in a year. Owen sat to his immediate right. He had clearly tried to pull himself together. He was clean-shaven, his hair perfectly parted, wearing the navy blazer I had bought him for our 5th anniversary. But the facade was incredibly thin. His eyes were bloodshot, and the skin around his jaw was tight with exhausted, barely concealed panic. He looked at me as I walked in, his expression instantly molding into a pathetic mask of sorrow and hopeful contrition. He truly believed he still had a chance to manage this. He thought I was there to play the role of the pragmatic, slightly bitter wife who would eventually sign the retroactive approvals in exchange for a quiet divorce and a handsome, heavily funded settlement. The rest of the room was a gallery of institutional power and nervous money. A representative from the primary lending fund sat opposite Adrian, tapping an expensive fountain pen against a legal pad. The buyer's corporate attorney sat next to him, reviewing a stack of disclosures. Marisol Dean occupied a chair in the far corner, looking physically ill, staring intently at the wood grain of the table to avoid making eye contact with me. A representative from the regional title vendor was present, along with 2 minor, independent investors who sat near the back. They carried the distinct, uneasy posture of men who smelled smoke but could not yet see the fire, unwilling to abandon a lucrative deal but terrified of a sudden burn. We took our seats at the opposite end of the mahogany expanse. I sat in the center, flanked by Elise and Noah like stone sentinels. I did not fold my hands. I placed them flat on the table. Adrian initiated the proceedings. His voice was a smooth, practiced baritone, rolling over the room with patronizing warmth. He thanked everyone for traveling down on such short notice. Then, he turned his attention to me, his smile perfectly calibrated to convey a mix of professional respect and gentle condescension. He began to narrate a heavily sanitized, entirely fictional version of the past 8 months. He framed the entire syndication crisis not as a massive, coordinated fraud, but as a minor, unfortunate domestic misunderstanding that had temporarily spilled over into the commercial sphere. He looked at the lender and the investors, assuring them that I had been fully aware of the Ashbourne acquisition from its very inception. He stated, with absolute conviction, that I had given my enthusiastic, verbal support to the project, and that the recent marital friction between Owen and myself had simply clouded my judgment and caused a temporary delay in the final paperwork. Owen chimed in exactly on cue. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of deep, personal regret. He spoke about the stress of the industry, the pressure of providing for our future, and how a single isolated mistake in our personal life had caused me to react defensively. He looked directly at me, his eyes pleading. He essentially told the room that he was a flawed husband asking for a chance to make things right, to protect our shared financial future, and to close this chapter amicably. It was a breathtaking performance. They had built a narrative where I was just an emotional, scorned woman who needed to be financially pacified so the men could get back to the serious business of making money. Adrian gestured to his attorney, who slid a thick, freshly printed portfolio across the long table. It came to rest directly in front of me. Adrian explained that this was a clean, revised set of closing documents. It contained retroactive approvals that would elegantly clear up any lingering confusion regarding the collateralization of my warehouse and my listed advisory role. It was a golden bridge, built specifically for me to walk across and quietly disappear. I pulled the binder a few inches closer. I opened the heavy cover and looked at the first page. It was impeccably clean. The blatant, messy forgeries that Marisol had shown me were gone, replaced by dense, sanitized legal clauses that merely required my signature today to ratify every single lie they had told over the past year. I left the binder open and let the silence do the work. It thickened until even the lender stopped scratching notes with his fountain pen. I looked up from the paper and locked eyes with Adrian. "I have a few minor questions regarding the administrative timeline," I said. My voice was low, conversational, yet it carried clearly to every corner of the freezing room. Adrian offered a benevolent nod. "Of course. Holly, whatever you need to feel comfortable. Let us begin with the courier," I said, my tone flat. "Can you provide the exact dispatch authorization and the internal tracking number for the urgent package sent to my personal residence on a Tuesday afternoon, roughly 4 days ago?" Adrian blinked. His benevolent smile faltered by a fraction of a millimeter. "I am sure we can have our logistics team pull that specific receipt if you feel it is strictly necessary. Though I hardly see how a delivery schedule impacts the core financial agreements today." I did not acknowledge his deflection. I turned my head slowly to face my husband. "Owen," I said, stripping his name of any residual affection, "can you confirm for the room the exact hour and the specific internet protocol address your laptop utilized to access our secured, encrypted home server? Specifically, the network entry required to download the high-resolution scan of my federal passport." The blood completely drained from Owen's face. He opened his mouth, but his vocal cords refused to produce a single sound. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the click before he could attempt to formulate a lie. I shifted my gaze down the table to the regional title vendor. The man nervously adjusted his tie. "A question of local property law," I continued, my voice taking on the sharp, clinical edge of a seasoned auditor. "In this specific jurisdiction, is an alleged verbal agreement, supposedly given over a domestic dinner table, legally sufficient to encumber a multi-million-dollar commercial property held by a single-member limited liability company, or does it strictly require a notarized, wet ink signature executed in the physical presence of a certified officer?" The title vendor swallowed hard. He looked at Adrian, then at the lender, before finally looking back at me. "It strictly requires a notarized, wet ink signature. Ma'am, verbal support carries absolutely no legal weight in a commercial lien transfer." The atmosphere in the boardroom fractured entirely. The comfortable, patronizing illusion of a simple marital dispute shattered into 1,000 pieces. The air grew immediately toxic. Marisol Dean went completely pale, her hands gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew exactly what was happening. The representative from the primary lending fund, who had been casually reviewing the executive summary, suddenly sat up rigid in his leather chair. He abandoned the front of his binder and began frantically flipping toward the dense legal appendix at the back, his eyes darting across the pages looking for the guarantor clauses. The two minor investors in the back of the room exchanged terrified, wide-eyed glances, the smell of catastrophic risk finally reaching them. Adrian tried to seize control of the narrative. He leaned forward, his voice losing its cultured warmth and adopting a sharp, aggressive edge. "Holly, you are focusing on irrelevant procedural technicalities. We are here to finalize a highly lucrative transfer of assets, not to audit the rough drafts of the administrative process." Owen stared at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a sudden, devastating horror. The delusion that he could still manipulate me completely evaporated. He finally understood that I had not traveled to Savannah to negotiate a severance package. I had not come to salvage his pride or protect his reputation. I had come to execute a flawless, systematic demolition of his entire life. I let his panic fill the room. I let the silence hang for 5 agonizing seconds, forcing every single man at that table to sit in the freezing reality of their impending ruin. Slowly, deliberately, I reached down to the floor beside my chair. I lifted my own heavy, leather-bound briefcase and placed it squarely in the center of the polished mahogany table. I snapped the brass latches open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I looked at Owen one last time. I did not see the man I had married. I did not see a partner, a lover, or even a formidable adversary. I simply saw a stranger who had made a fatal, unforgivable miscalculation. "All right," I said, my voice cutting through the dead air of the boardroom. "Now it is my turn." I reached into the open leather briefcase resting on the mahogany table. I did not pull out a single, desperate sheet of paper. I withdrew 6 perfectly bound, heavily tabbed dossiers and slid them across the polished surface. I directed one to the representative of the primary lending fund. I pushed another toward the corporate counsel for the buyers. The rest I left in the center of the table, an undeniable monument to the truth. "What you are looking at," I began, my voice perfectly level, "is the actual unredacted architecture of this syndication." I watched as the lender opened the heavy cover. Tab 1 contains the legally binding transaction restriction I filed on the commercial property you know as James Rowe Storage. That restriction was initiated days ago. It renders any mortgage, lien, or transfer regarding that property entirely impossible without my physical presence. I gestured to the woman who had walked into the room behind me, taking a seat against the far wall. I brought a senior title examiner from Louisville to verify the chain of custody. Dana, if you would. Dana stood up and approached the edge of the table. She did not look at her brother. She looked directly at the regional title vendor. If you turn to page 14, you will find the certified metadata logs for the primary collateral addendum. I pulled these directly from the multi-state pre-closing workflow. You will see 3 distinct layers of digital manipulation. The parcel identification codes were attached illegally. More importantly, the electronic signatures applied to those pages hold absolutely zero legal validity. This specific commercial asset demands a direct wet ink verification by the sole proprietor. What you have in your draft binder is a poorly executed forgery. The regional title vendor immediately flipped to the specified page. His eyes scanned the data, his face turning an ashen gray. He closed his binder and pushed his chair back from the table, physically distancing himself from the fraudulent paperwork. Tab 2, I continued, commanding the room's attention once more, contains the digital forensic report compiled by Mr. Noah Pike. Noah leaned forward, his demeanor entirely clinical. We mirrored the network logs from the Mercer residence. If you review the timestamps on page 22, you will see that the high-resolution scan of Mrs. Mercer's federal passport, the exact document you are currently using to secure the secondary guarantor clause of your bridge loan, was covertly extracted from her secure localized archives at exactly 10:15 in the evening. This extraction occurred on a Tuesday, while Mrs. Mercer was out of the state on corporate business, and exactly when Mr. Mercer was the sole occupant connected to the home network. The representative from the primary lending fund stopped reading. He slowly unscrewed the cap of his expensive fountain pen, secured it, and placed the pen down. He looked at Adrian Vale with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. Elise, my attorney, delivered the final legal hammer. She looked directly at the buyer's counsel. Gentlemen, you are all seasoned professionals. I do not need to explain the catastrophic civil and criminal liabilities associated with knowingly processing forged federal identification and stolen commercial assets across state lines. If a single dollar moves, or a single signature is ratified after this exact moment, every corporate entity in this room crosses the threshold into severe, actionable fraud. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The representative from the primary lending fund stood up, gathered his belongings, and snapped his briefcase shut. He did not say a word to Adrian. He simply walked toward the heavy double doors. The attorney representing Adrian's professional liability carrier immediately stated, for the record, that he was formally withdrawing from the table. The two independent investors in the back of the room began demanding immediate answers, their voices rising in panicked, angry tones, asking where their initial escrow deposits had gone. The sophisticated, highly leveraged illusion had completely shattered. Owen completely lost his composure. The suave, articulate executive vanished, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. He jumped out of his chair and pointed a trembling finger at Adrian. He manipulated me. Adrian knew that the warehouse was off limits. He pushed me to find alternative collateral. He is the one who engineered the digital signature layers because his mezzanine lenders were threatening to pull out. I was just trying to protect the firm. Adrian did not flinch. He slowly turned his head to look at Owen. His eyes filled with venomous contempt. The polished gentleman was gone. The financial scavenger was fully exposed. You pathetic, lying parasite. Do not attempt to pin your domestic theft on me. You are the one who brought the warehouse portfolio to my office. You told me your wife was completely oblivious to her own financial structure. You specifically suggested we keep the marriage completely placated and quiet until the closing funded so you could secure your management fee. They were tearing each other apart. Exactly as Marisol had predicted, they were two drowning men fighting over the same anchor. I waited for their shouting to reach a fever pitch. I waited until the entire room was watching them cannibalize their own partnership. Then, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Actually, gentlemen, I said, my voice slicing effortlessly through their chaotic argument, you are both lying. I pressed a button on the screen, routing the audio through the small Bluetooth speaker I had placed on the table. It was a recording Marisol had managed to secure from the internal server. Combined with the time-stamped emails Elise had subpoenaed, the audio filled the room. It was Owen's voice, confident and calculating, recorded 4 months prior. He was explicitly pitching the warehouse to Adrian, detailing exactly how he planned to quietly bypass the management company. Then came the emails, projected onto the screen by Noah, showing Owen systematically scheduling the fake client emergency and the rooftop birthday dinner. He had designed that entire night as a deliberate, theatrical smokescreen to keep me out of the house while he pushed the final documents through. Every single avenue of escape evaporated simultaneously. Owen could no longer play the victim of a predatory mentor. Adrian could no longer claim he was simply an innocent investor misled by a rogue partner. They had completely locked each other in a cage built entirely from their own recorded confessions and digital footprints. I did not give them a scene. I simply stood up and smoothed the fabric of my midnight blue silk jumpsuit. Thank you all for your time, I said to the remaining lawyers and the terrified investors. I highly suggest you contact your respective compliance departments. I turned and walked out of the freezing boardroom, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I left them all behind, trapped in a room where the lights were finally turned all the way up, exposing the two men for exactly what they were. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within 5 days, Wexler North Consulting formally terminated Owen's employment, erasing his corporate existence. The Ashbourne House syndication collapsed in a spectacular firestorm of litigation. Adrian Vale spent the next several months drowning in lawsuits from his minor investors and fighting a relentless wave of civil investigations regarding his fraudulent disclosures. As for me, the divorce was finalized a few months later. It was remarkably clean. primarily because Owen possessed absolutely zero leverage and lacked the financial resources to mount a defense. I retained total, undisputed ownership of my commercial warehouse and every single premarital asset I had built. I did not return to the corporate compliance department. I resigned from my position and took my capital to open my own independent contract risk consulting firm, specifically dedicated to auditing and protecting the assets of women-led businesses. When my 40th birthday arrived the following year, I did not book a table at a quiet, romantic rooftop restaurant. I rented out the entire back patio of a vibrant, loud coastal bistro. I sat at a long, beautifully decorated table surrounded by noise and laughter. Dana flew in from Louisville, my best friend. Lila Crow sat to my right. Every single chair was filled with people who actively chose to be there. People who did not view my existence as collateral. There was no empty seat waiting for a man who was never going to arrive. There were no lies hidden in the fine print. And for the very first time in a remarkably long time, as I looked around the table, I finally understood the magnitude of what I had actually won. I had not merely saved my money, my real estate, or my credit score. I had saved my name. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments below, so we can interact and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the Olivia Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and support me further by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.